My name's Mari, and I want to tell you a little bit more about how I became burnt out in my mid 20s. So, I was working in the PR and communications industry for about the past 3 years. It was my first ever corporate style job. I learned a lot from my time there. Certainly, a lot about the kind of nature of the industry, client work. If you don't know, especially from an agency side, the idea is anytime that a client has a new launch, or a activation or a new product, we're the kind of middlemen who would facilitate that launch. We would speak to media, we would be the people who would arrange influencers. We would do the kind of media releases, which is kind of stories that we ghostwrite essentially, that would be sent to media, for them to kind of cover, and that would kind of be a return investment for a client because that would get the word out. Again, we would also kind of liaise with influencers that they would post social media content, and that would be, of course, then spreading awareness further of that product or that client, whatever it is that they're working on. And we would just kind of do a lot of the behind the scenes prep work and planning, for these big launch events, whether it was a hotel or it was, kind of more of a corporate client, like a big meeting or a big announcement. We would also manage things called crisis communications, which is basically when something goes wrong with a product, or a kind of client or company is under kind of hot water, a lot of scrutiny. We would kind of be the people who would respond to media inquiries, asking, know what's going on, can we learn more X, Y, Z. That was the kind of main broad strokes of what we did. Just a lot of the behind the scenes work. We'd create the props as well. We would organize decorations for events, all these kind of things. So it is a lot of wearing different hats. And as I say, I came from an agency, so there's kind of two ways to go about that. You can be in-house, which is the term they use, which is kind of I work directly for the corporation or company, whatever. I'm doing their events, I'm doing their kind of launches, etc., just directly. I was in the agency side where you are kind of assigned to different accounts, the kind of different clients, and there you will kind of help to manage their different activations essentially. Usually there's supposed to be or can be a limit of a certain amount, so maybe 5 or 6 clients per person, but it also just depends on the exact company or agency that you work for. We were often kind of at 8 or 9 or so thereabouts of kind of different clients at any given month, but that would change month to month as well. I give you all this background just to kind of give you context on where I'm coming from. This was my first job, as I say, working in this agency environment, in this kind of communications agency. Obviously, not going to name any names, but that was my first kind of experience of a job. And I think I give you all this background just to kind of give you context on where I'm coming from. This was my first job, as I say, working in this agency environment, in this kind of communications agency. Obviously, not going to name any names, but that was my first kind of experience of a job. And I think I learned a lot about the industry and kind of the way that it works, but also a lot about the way people work and clients work, but also about how toxic, if I'm honest, that industry can be at times. Um, and I think when I'm trying to kind of communicate these points, it's not always going to be the easiest because I understand that there's people who will kind of fairly question. It doesn't sound so bad. Like you're kind of creating events and launches for clients or products and things. It doesn't sound so bad. What are you kind of talking about here? Where is this strong sentiment of burnout coming from? I'll do my best to describe what I mean by that. This is unscripted. I have a few notes, but I think I'm just going to kind of try and take you through it point by point in hope that you can follow along with me. So as I say, I worked in this agency position, my first ever kind of full-time job, if you like, out of university. My background is kind of English literature, creative writing, a writer first and foremost. That's kind of what I was known for. So, copywriting. As I said, we would often kind of ghostwrite essentially stories for clients. When you hear a corporate statement and it's so and so executive says this, we would be the people who wrote it. So, maybe I'm spilling the industry beans here, but of course, CEO XYZ or whoever doesn't often say their own quotes. Sometimes they do. They'll kind of prepare a statement, but oftentimes we write for them. Um, but yeah, so working in this kind of industry for 3 years, and you'll hear the term, the kind of jargon, in places like LinkedIn about fast-paced work environments. And I think that is certainly the case in an agency, and especially, yeah, in the communications, which is where my experience lies. There is an expectation to always be present. There's an expectation to always be available. And I think that on its own maybe doesn't sound super invasive or toxic, but there is, certainly from my perspective, and the people that I've spoken to, again, naming no names within the industry, that there is just a great deal of anxiety about what you're expected to do, and how quickly and to the degree and the standard that you're expected to produce it. So I'll kind of clarify a little bit what I mean. And to do that, I'm going to give you a little bit of context on the kind of hierarchical structure of what we call accounts, which is the kind of the makeup of the individual teams that work with kind of clients individually.